Good morning. I hope you're all keeping well and you've been able to enjoy something of the summer even in these strange times. One of the things I've been trying to do over the summer is to catch up on all the books that I was meant to read last year for Union and didn't. And one of the books I've been reading is by a guy called Dan Strange. It's called Plugged In. It's all about how we as Christians should be biblically engaging with the culture that we're a part of, with the world around us. It's well worth a read. But one of the things that he mentions in the book that really jumped out at me, and as I came to think of this psalm, it just kept coming back into my mind. He talks about our world as being made up of sunshine and shadow, and how God uses both of those things to draw people to Himself. The sunshine are those moments in life where we perhaps see the world just a little bit more the way it was made to be, perfect and filled with God's goodness, and how it will one day be again for those of us who follow Christ. That cracking view from the top of Donard, that piece of music that just lifts our soul, that sense of togetherness and community that takes place at a football or a rugby match. That moment in the movie where the hero makes that selfless sacrifice to save others. These are little moments of sunshine. Moments that show us the goodness of God that still exists even in this fallen world and us fallen people. Little moments that God can use to point us to Himself as the source of all light and goodness. And then there's the shadow. All those difficult moments, the pain, the hurt, the sorrow, the pandemic, the problems that we cause to ourselves and others because of the effects of sin. All these things remind us that the world isn't all sunshine, that something has gone terribly wrong. And again, God can use these things to draw us to Himself as the only one who can deal with the darkness and bring us into the light permanently because of Jesus. Psalm 126 is a psalm of sunshine and shadow. A psalm that highlights God's goodness in the world and to His people, but also shows us a world gone wrong and in desperate need of God's rescue and continued grace. What we see is that both in sunshine and shadow, the people keep their eyes fixed on God, on His promises. And it leads to them being able to keep true perspective regardless of the circumstances. And as we think about it this morning, hopefully we'll be able to see that no matter what, we need to keep our eyes and our lives fixed on our promise-making, promise-keeping God, so that we can have true joy and peace in the sunshine and perseverance through the shadow, knowing that God's joy and peace will come again and ultimately will be ours forever. Psalm 126 is one of the songs of ascent, the songs the people would have sung as they made their way up the hill in Jerusalem towards the temple, the place where God had allowed His presence to rest in a special way, so that He could be and live among His people. These were the songs that people sang as they fixed their eyes on God, as they made this pilgrimage to the temple to ask for forgiveness and to give God the glory for all that He had done for them and promised to them. Verses 1 to 3 seem to recount the Israelites' return from exile in Babylon. This incredible moment of God's rescue and care that was almost unbelievable. Verse 1 describes it as being almost like a dream. It was so unexpected, so unheard of. In the ancient world, ruling powers would often invade other nations and take land, property, and people into captivity. But for the king of one of these nations to turn around and free a captive nation, that was unheard of. And not only this, but that this king who had held them captive gave them resources to rebuild their capital and the temple to a God that he didn't worship. And this wasn't because King Darius was looking to set up a buffer zone between himself and a hostile nation. He controlled all the land around Israel. And he didn't need to set up any sort of ally for Persia because many of the Israelites were already conscripted into his armies and his government. No, the opening verses of Ezra make it clear that there is no earthly reason for this change of Darius's heart. It is because God, in his sovereignty and his control over all things, moved Darius, this ruler of an oppressive nation, to allow this remnant of God's people to return to the land that God had given to them. And this restoration, it takes place almost exactly after the 70 years that Jeremiah had prophesied God would exile Israel as a punishment for their continuous sin. See, as with all things, God has his hands all over it, restoring this remnant of Israel for his glory, and through which Jesus, the source of his true and everlasting restoration, would come about 500 years later. The beginning of this psalm was written as a response for all God had done in this amazing, almost unbelievable act of grace, mercy, and power. And what is their response? It's to laugh and sing and shout with joy. Not just about how good their life now is, but how good their God is. They say the Lord has done great things for us. They've been freed from bondage, returned to their land. They've worked hard to get the walls and the temple and their houses rebuilt. They've struggled trying to put back together this community whilst facing intense opposition, as Ezra and Nehemiah tell us. But interestingly, they're not interested in celebrating their own ingenuity or abilities or newfound freedom and prosperity. Instead, they look around at all that they now have and they recognize that everything that they own and everything that they are is a gift from their loving, forgiving, merciful Father. And so they give him all the glory. They recognized that all the sunshine, all the good things in their lives were gifts from God, meant to lead them to glorify and worship him. I wonder, is it the same for us? When God has blessed us, when we look at the gifts that he has given to us, the abilities, the jobs, the homes, the healthcare, the food and water that we all have access to, our friends, our family, our church community, which we've all been missing deeply over the last while. Do we respond to those gifts by praising and glorifying the God who has given them to us? Or do we look at all that we have and all that we are as products of our own achievement, of our own good work? When things are going well for us, the temptation is not to glorify and worship our God more. It's to forget him. To forget that everything in the universe is held together only by his continuing grace towards us, as Colossians 1:17 reminds us. That whether we believe in him or not, whether we follow him or not, we are completely dependent on him and his mercy at all times. And yet, when life is good, how quick are we to leave God on the sidelines and get on with our lives as if it's all about us? I wonder, have you maybe forgotten what proper sunshine looks like over the last few weeks? But do you remember back to the start of lockdown, when it was just glorious sunshine every day for weeks? And lots of us were out sunning ourselves in our back gardens or front steps. I even saw one person who lived a few floors up in a flat, was walking past and I just saw them sitting at the window with their legs dangling out. Well, the way we are so often tempted to get on in the good times. It's like somebody getting a lovely tan from sitting outside, but denying that the sun had played any part in it. This is my tan, which I got from my hard work. It's a bit of a silly example, but just as it should be plainly obvious to that person that their tan came from the melanin in their skin reacting to the sun's rays, it should be just as obvious to us who know something of who our God is, that God is the one who provides everything good that we have. And our response should be praise and thanksgiving to our Father in heaven who loves us and who pours out his undeserved blessings upon us. That is the reaction we see from the Israelites in this psalm. Joy, laughter, gladness that God has rescued them from captivity and restored them to Israel. But shouldn't our joy and our laughter and our gladness not be so much greater than theirs? Because we live in an incredible age. We live in a time when we know what God went on to do, where God has not just given us earthly, fleeting blessings to point us to him, but he has sent his Son to show us how to live, and ultimately to die as a sacrifice, taking that sin and punishment of those called to follow him onto himself, and instead poured his righteousness and goodness onto us, so that we can now stand before God clothed in Christ as not just his forgiven subjects, but as his beloved children. Those of us who have responded to God's call and put our faith in Christ's finished work, we're rescued from the fair and just punishment that our sin deserves, and are instead welcomed into this better life with Christ, and an eternity of perfect joy and laughter and peace. The reality is that every day, maybe even every minute of every day, our lips should be crying out, "The Lord has done great things for us," and we are filled with joy. Let's just take a few moments now to respond to that by sharing together in the singing of a song that reminds us of who our God is and all that he has done for us. We're going to sing together now, "Behold our God."